conflict renewed, the War of 1812. Welcome to lesson 6.3. We've been gearing up for this big war that's about to take place. Today we're finally going to learn about it. What effect did that war, the War of 1812, have on Canada? So stick around and let's learn something. Lesson 6.3, what effect did the War of 1812 have on Canada? This is all about a renewed conflict. This is the War of 1812. We might have a lot of background knowledge on this one, but there's a very good chance that what we think we already know is not actually the truth. So we are going to today learn about that so that we can move forward and we will know some of the key facts and then maybe change some of our background knowledge and make it true. So we're going to get started with this renewed conflict leading up to the War of 1812. And as no big surprise, if you've been watching any of my lessons and following along in class and that kind of stuff, we know peace does not last long, especially in our story of Canada, the continuing story of Canada. Peace does not last long. And, well, therefore, the tensions between the British and the now United States of America, they are going to be renewed as well. And the War of 1812 does have an effect on absolutely everybody that is involved. Okay, so all of North America is going to be thrown into this. So Britain is at war with France, and during this time, which prevented Americans from trading with the French. So the British stopped French trading ships trading with the French, and that's going to make the Americans really upset. That, combined with the fact that the British were kidnapping American sailors and then forcing them to serve on these British ships, that's not going to be really nice. They're going to have an issue with that. The British were supporting the First Nations in their land struggle against the Americans. So obviously Americans aren't going to like that. And the Americans, well, they wanted manifest destiny. They wanted all of the British colonies of North America. So this is going to be some, obviously, cause for tensions. And when the war began in 1812, the British wondered who could they actually count on in terms of loyalty in British North America. Can they rely on those English colonists that came north during the American War of Independence? If they did count on them, they are still going to be outnumbered by 4-1. Would the Canadiens help them up, or help them out, I should say? They weren't. It wasn't that far out that the British and French were at war again. So the Canadiens, after the Quebec Act, are they going to help out the British? So who are they going to be able to count on? Who are they not going to be able to count on? Well, one of the groups that they were able to count on was the First Nations. Tecumseh, I think, is how you say it. Let's just see what Siri says. Siri, can you please pronounce this?
Tecumseh.
Tecumseh is the leader of the Shawnee First Nation, and they were Britain's greatest allies here in North America. He himself, as leader, led approximately 3,000 soldiers into battle against the Americans in the Ohio Valley. And this war was also allied with Britain. So they allied with Britain as well for the War of 1812. They won the Battle of Detroit, which was a huge victory for the British and their allies as well, and their allies, the First Nations. Unfortunately, in Moraviantown, they lost the battle there, and our leader died. And the death was a great blow to the British side because he was such a great warrior and he was such a fantastic leader, and the death really hit hard on the British side. So we are in the midst of war. It's 1812. We're in the midst of war. So the British soldiers up in British North America, we'll call that Canada, you can see it here on the map, they, along with the militia and the First Nations, they fought the American invaders, which started coming up north in and around April of 1813. The Americans, however, they had a fleet on the Great Lakes, on Lake Ontario, and they were bombarding York, which is now present-day Toronto. They made their way on land, on shore, where they looted shops, they looted homes. They were just, tearing the place up. And they went to the government buildings and they burned them down. Well, in August of 1814, this is still during the War of 1812, the British retaliate. They make their way down to Washington, D.C., and they set fire to their government buildings in Washington, D.C. Okay, and this is where a lot of Canadians are stuck on the War of 1812. Yeah, Canadians, we went and we burned down the White House. That's not entirely true. People often think that Canada was a country during this time. We were not just yet a country. So it was actually the British who went down there to retaliate against the bombardment of York, which is today Toronto. Now, this War of 1812 has a huge impact. Now, I just mentioned that Canada was not yet a country, but we're laying the foundations of becoming a country. This chapter is all about becoming Canada. And there was a huge impact on the war. The war ends in deadlock. Now, that being said, the Americans and the British North Americans, Upper and Lower Canada, they each view their side as being the victors. Okay, so the war officially ended on Christmas Eve of 1814 in Ghent, Belgium. So the British and the Americans, they meet in Ghent in Belgium. They write this official treaty and it ends the war. And basically what happens is both sides, so the British in British North America and the Americans from the United States, they agree to give back all gained territory. So any territory that was gained during the War of 1812 was returned back to its previous owner, either the British or the Americans. Nothing got returned, unfortunately, to the First Nations. They then, and this is in effect today, they agree that they are going to make the 49th parallel a political boundary all the way from the western edge of the Great Lakes to the Rockies. That still exists today, our 49th parallel. To the east of the Great Lakes, Canada does have territory below the 49th parallel, and there's a couple spots here and there, like in British Columbia, where it dips below or above, depending on which country you are talking about, the 49th parallel. As I mentioned earlier, the Americans saw this war as a victory. The Canadians in Upper and Lower Canada, they saw it as a victory. Neither side wanted to admit that they had lost or that it was kind of like a tie. It ended in deadlock. But one group could not claim victory, and that was our First Nations. In total, 15,000 died. That's more than either of the British side or the American side. After the war, the British proposed to the Americans to give the First Nations their own state. But the Americans did not follow through with that. They refused to give their First Nations their own state, and therefore our First Nations can claim, unfortunately, they can claim no victory in the War of 1812. All right, head to your notebook to complete the questions for this part of the chapter.